F1 fans assemble! We have a lot to talk about today. Of course, it's common knowledge at this point that Brad Pitt is starring in an F1 movie, being produced by 7-time World Drivers' Champion Lewis Hamilton. There are obviously no questions about Hamilton's involvement in the sport, but is Brad Pitt truly engrossed in the F1 world? Snubbing the Martin Brundle during a grid walk does raise that question, doesn't it? Let's dive right into it. First off, Brad Pitt all but ignored Martin Brundle at the US Grand Prix. Yep, you heard that right, folks. The once upon a time in Hollywood star was present in Austin, Texas last weekend for the F1 action and the US Grand Prix. If you're making a movie about it, you gotta show up for it, right? But one particular interaction of his gained attention rapidly, and not in a good way. It was related to former race car driver turned pundit Martin Brundle. Often known as the voice of F1, Brundle is infamous for his grid walks where he questions attending celebs and the like. This time, it was Pitt whom the Sky Sports pundit set out to have a chat with. During his Sunday walk, he spotted the A-lister and managed to get through his entourage for some questions. Firstly, when Brundle introduced himself from the sidelines, Brad completely ignored his voice and walked on. Then the interviewer asked about the upcoming movie, to which Brad simply threw in a "no, not yet, top secret," not even sparing a glance. Martin's last attempt to engage the movie star was to mention how he'd seen him around quite a bit throughout the week, and asked if he'd enjoyed his time. Pitt basically shut Brundle up with a "thank you, man," and walked full speed away in the other direction. Not cool, Brad. Brundle is practically considered F1 royalty at this point, and the 58-year-old actor giving him the cold shoulder is not a good sign for his new movie. After all, if you don't even recognize one of the most iconic people in F1, how are you going to make an iconic movie on it? Next, Brundle managed to crack out an ingenious pun. Being snubbed by someone who's making a movie on F1 when you've been involved in the sport since the 80s is harsh to say the least. But we don't just call Martin Brundle the voice of F1 for no reason. Even when Brad Pitt very clearly ignored his presence during the grid walk, Brundle wasn't going to let the viewers at home down. When one of the actor's bodyguards pushed him away, he said, "Somebody's grabbing my shoulder," obviously known as a pit stop if they don't want you to talk to Brad Pitt. Pretty genius, we have to admit, especially considering it was totally off the cuff. This just goes to show how much of his life Martin has dedicated to Formula 1. Puns about the sport are just second nature to him at this point. Let's discuss the fans' reaction to the incident. Twitter sure gave Brad a hard time. Of course, nothing goes unnoticed by the users of the Bird app. It wasn't long before the incident happened that reactions came pouring in from Formula 1 fans who clearly respect Brundle as an F1 legend. Unfortunately for Pitt, the reaction was almost entirely negative. Brad Pitt obviously doesn't realize he's just blatantly dissed F1 royalty Martin Brundle in front of the whole world, tweeted one user, and this was just one of the tamer takes. To be fair, we get the criticism. After all, if Pitt didn't want to be interviewed, he shouldn't have exited through the grid. Plus, Brundle wasn't even asking any annoying paparazzi-type questions. He was literally asking about the movie. It probably would have been a good marketing opportunity for Brad, but oh well. As Twitter explained how he wasn't sure if he understood the logic of Brad Pitt not wanting to spend just a moment to talk to Martin Brundle during the grid walk. For die-hard fans of the sport, Martin Brundle is an icon, and so many were upset at the general treatment he received from celebs, as if Brad Pitt just brushed off Martin Brundle. It's Martin Brundle. This is his playground. Safe to say, Mr. Pitt's integrity in the film is definitely under some harsh scrutiny. He better not slip up in the future. What's more, other celebs interacted pretty nicely with Brundle. The Fight Club actor wasn't the only star present at the event in Texas. Many other celebs showed up, and thankfully, we got some cool gridwalk interactions. First up was Ed Sheeran, who just spoke briefly while walking. He told the Sky Sports legend that he was excited to be attending a Grand Prix event and that he was supporting Red Bull. The musician had just left the team's garage, so that was pretty much a no-brainer. Still, at least he spared some 30 seconds for Brundle, unlike some other celebs. Another genius moment came when Green Day band member Trey Cool walked up to the show-stopping drummer and said, "Is this going to be a boulevard of broken dreams?" Now, if you don't get this reference, you've definitely been living under a rock for the past 20 years. But come on, Brundle's mind is on another level. No wonder fans swarmed to his support when Pitt made his fatal mistake. Moving on, Brad did eventually send a note to Martin clarifying his actions. Pretty unexpected, but a good move on Pitt's part nonetheless. After the huge amount of hate the A-lister was getting, he probably decided to clear the air by contacting Brundle personally. In a tweet from his official account, Brundle revealed that he'd received a note from the actor, explaining what happened on the Austin grid. The pundit described it as unnecessary but nice of him. He didn't share the context contents of the note, but did comment on the incident himself, saying that other people weren't obliged in any way to talk to him on the grid. He did further add that it was his obligation to at least ask. We think Brundle's being modest about his position. Celebs may not be obliged per se, but it's definitely a good gesture to give a few minutes of your time to the F1 legend. Some of the most iconic F1 celebrity moments have occurred during his grid walks. Well, it was certainly a controversial interaction, but we're still pretty pumped about the movie. Formula 1 movies are a pretty rare phenomenon, and we're just glad to be getting one in the future. Plus, with the rise in popularity of the sport in the US, it's bound to rake in the dollars. Speaking of, do you know why Red Bull team boss Christian Horner is happy with the possible arrival of Logan Sargent in the F1 grid? Let's find out. On to Horner's hopes for F1 with Logan Sargent's arrival. Basically, during the US Grand Prix last weekend, the Williams team boss Jos Capito shared that Logan Sargent would be getting the second Williams seat alongside Alexander Albon. The only condition is that the driver has to acquire a super license following the end of the Abu Dhabi Formula 2 round next month. Now, if all goes to plan, Sargent would become the first US driver to race in F1 since Alexander Rossi, who was involved with Manor Marussia in 2015. So what does Horner have to do with it? Well, the Red Bull boss has been looking to add an American driver on board for quite some time now. He's been on Colta Herta's chase to place him at AlphaTauri next year. Even though that didn't work out, Horner is still pleased with the addition of an American to F1 as a whole. "I think it's great news," were his words. According to him, there's growth in the US for a sport like F1. Having just been in Vegas, overseeing the preparations for the upcoming races, he observed that the public was really excited, which is exactly why Horner believes an American driver is needed. The Red Bull boss added that Brad Pitt making a movie on F1 wasn't sufficient to appease the Americans' need for proper engagement in the sport. A successful driver from the US is a need. Last but not least, how did a docuseries help F1 rise to popularity in the US? It was none other than the Netflix docuseries Drive to Survive. You'd think a simple documentary wouldn't have that much of an impact on the sports viewership of an entire country. You'd be wrong. Drive to Survive reached across the pond like a few pieces of media have managed to do. It was released in 2019, and the stats after that just prove it all. The viewership per race has increased from 547,722 viewers in 2018 to 1.4 million viewers in 2022. Not only that, a poll conducted by Inside Hook revealed that more than 50% of self-identifying F1 fans in the US claim that they began watching the sport after the docuseries. Now in 2022, the US is set to host 3 races for the sport. And in 2023, the US will be the country with the most Grand Prix. Crazy, right? And that's it from our side, folks. What are your thoughts on Brad's attitude towards Brundle on the grid walk? Oh, and also, let us know your thoughts on this upcoming movie in the comments below. Make sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to more videos like this. See you in the next one.